Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0. Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy the fanfic. And let's begin. What if Naruto and Ino woke up together after one wild night? Part 1. The first sensation that came back to Ino was that of warmth and comfort. The sluggish firing of her pre-awake neurons was not capable of registering anything but physical sensations at the moment, and what she felt was a bone-deep weariness. The type of exhaustion that comes from having pushed the body well past its physical limitations, a familiar friend to most shinobi, but oddly enough Ino felt rather content. It was the same feeling of having become aware of being awake on a cold winter morning where even without stepping out of bed you knew it was freezing cold, but you also knew you didn't have anywhere to go or anything to do, so you could just snuggle deeper into your covers. And snuggle closer to her source of warmth she did, squirming closer to the strong pair of arms draped around her body. There was a momentary pause as her mind finally processed her own observations. Slowly she cracked an eye open to take in her surroundings. The first most notable thing was the fact that she was most definitely not in her own room. The second being that the room she was in was trashed. Items and knick-knacks were scattered around the room, as were a number of articles of clothing, many of which were recognizably hers. Oh yes, the dark lacy panties strung over the chair was definitely hers. A wooden chair near the window letting in the beams of sunlight through the closed drapes had been tipped over, and the drawers to a standing dresser had been pulled out and even torn out in one case. A desk stood neatly in a corner, the stationery that it held scattered across the floor as if someone had swept the tabletop in a hasty desire to clear it, and a dark beanbag chair lay ripped open with its fillings spilling out from its guts in a foamy mess. The mattress of the bed was half hanging off the frame a little ways from where her blanketed foot lay, but most distracting was the feeling of someone else's bare legs pressed up against hers. Oh look, she ideally thought, I think those are condoms. In fact, there were quite a few of the condemning little plastic rubbers scattered around and across the floor, winking back innocently at her in silent testament to her activities the night before. Shifting her body so she could pull back and take a look at who she had apparently decided to lose her virginity to on a whim, she was rewarded with a grunt before she could sneak a peek at her bedmate. Turning her head and looking up, she was rewarded with a pair of blue eyes gazing blearily back at hers. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out as she stared back at her former rival's teammate. While Naruto had never been particularly bad looking, he wasn't exactly going to win any beauty pageants when he was younger, his most distinguishing feature being those deep soulful eyes of his. But that had quickly changed after his little 3-year stint off in the world with Jiraiya. The boy had returned home quite the man and had become the talk of the women in the village. Whispers and giggles followed the clueless blonde around wherever he went, hungry eyes eating up his backside as he walked. Even Sakura, whom everyone was pretty sure was still absolutely hung up over the treacherous Uchiha, could be seen eyeing the blonde whenever she thought no one would notice, which amusingly enough quite a few people didn't fail to notice. The irresistible baby blue eyes that had trapped Ino's own gaze held a warmth and amusement to them that should have been pissing her off to no end, seeing the circumstances of how they had apparently gotten together, but she just couldn't bring herself to break away from the feeling of utter satisfaction coursing through her body at the moment. Hi. His morning voice was a deeper husk than his usual rough timbre, sending a shiver down Ino's spine as she felt her skin break out into gooseflesh from his tone. Hi. She returned with a quirk of her lips. His eyes finally released hers to gaze around the room, his eyebrows shooting upwards much to her amusement. Naruto pushed his upper body up to get a better look, taking Ino up with him slightly as she had been resting lazily against his rather well-defined chest. Finally he looked back down, meeting her gaze with a sheepish smile. Some night, huh? He asked. Unable to force her widening smile into a scowl she really felt should be directed at the man responsible for taking her virginity, Ino blew a stray strand of hair from her bangs out of her face. Some night, she replied through half-lidded eyes. We should probably talk, Naruto. Why don't you go take a shower while I clean up and make us? Here he paused to take a look at the alarm clock on the bedside, air lunch apparently. Okay. Ino sat up and rolled off her blonde companion, taking the thin bed sheets with her to cover her body. The curvy blonde took a moment to cast an appreciative gaze at her friend's exposed body, but she felt her eyes widen as her sightseeing strayed below his waist. While she had seen diagrams and videos of what the male organ was supposed to look like erect, she had never seen it in person before, and certainly they had never been quite that big. Naruto flushed with embarrassment at his saluting member, unsure of exactly what he was supposed to do. It certainly wasn't his first time sleeping with a woman, but this was the first time he'd done it after being blackout drunk and with a friend no less. On second thought, why don't I use the bathroom first? He mumbled as he stood up. Ino burst into a fit of giggles that she failed to cover up with her hand at the rather large throbbing protrusion waving about in her face. Yeah, you look like you could use a cold shower or two. Flushing slightly, the blonde male hurried on to the bathroom, unaware of the pair of teal eyes glued to his firm buttocks. Oh Ino, the blonde teen murmured to herself as she heard the shower turn on. What have you gotten yourself into, girl? Stepping out of the steaming shower, Ino was surprised at the state of tidiness of the torn-up room she had left behind just 20 minutes prior. All the randomly strewn clothing had either vanished or, in the case of her clothes, neatly folded and left on the bed whose mattress had finally nestled back into its frame. The furniture had all been put back to a more respectable location, and the majority of the trash had ended up in the now rather full waste bin between the desk and doorway. Smiling to herself slightly as she could hear and smell the sizzling of something delicious wafting in through the doorway, the blonde Yamanaka dropped the towel wrapped around her body to reach for her clothes on the bed. Of course, the moment the towel touched the floor was when she heard the rapping noise from the entryway to the bedroom. Turning, she faced her blonde lover who was currently leaning up against the doorframe, arms crossed and eyes most definitely not averted. Hey, he murmured while his gaze continued to roam across Ino's body in a notably hungry manner. Thought I'd let you know that lunch was ready. Fighting back an instinctive urge to blush and cover up, Ino instead placed a hand on her, turning so that she was even more exposed. Two could play at this game. Message received. Can I help you with anything else? She asked with a smirk. Naruto chuckled, the soft predatory laugh sending a shiver down Ino's spine. Just admiring the lovely view, he murmured huskily, his baby blues locked onto hers. This time Ino could not quite repress the blush that came to her cheeks. Snatching the towel holding her drying hair up, she hurled it at the blonde, causing him to duck out of the doorframe with a laugh. Hurry up, Ino-chan, his playful voice echoed as he headed back towards the kitchen, food's getting cold. Muttering to herself about perverted boys, Ino quickly put on the rest of her clothes, using the large towel previously used to cover her body to hastily dry her hair. Walking into kitchen, she found herself surrounded by the wonderful scent of freshly brewed coffee along with the sight of a meal fit for royalty laid out on the rather sparse dining table. Coffee. Ino nodded wordlessly at Naruto as she took a seat at the table, noting that the food was actually quite delicious looking, something she had not expected from him. For a guy who had lived alone all his life and practically survived off a diet of ramen, he was apparently a decent cook. Correction, Ino thought as she took her first bite, and her taste buds practically cried out in ecstasy, an amazing cook. Taking the offered cup of brown brew from Naruto, she added some cream and sugar until the color was to her liking before taking a sip of the hot coffee. Watching the blonde male bustle about putting things into the sink, she couldn't help but smirk slightly at the domestic scene. Just how many people knew this side of him? Or got to see it? Thought you were making us lunch? She asked after blowing on her coffee to cool it some. I lied, he replied with a charming smile that showed oversized canines as he finally joined her at the table. Hope you don't mind the Western-style breakfast I laid out. Found a taste for it while traveling with Jiraiya. Ino certainly had no complaints. There were a stack of golden brown pancakes piled half a dozen high, its varying color and texture suggesting a mixture of nuts and fruits in the batter that she couldn't wait to get a taste of. Her own plate was made up of some perfectly cooked scrambled eggs, not too runny but not hitting rubbery either, with a mixture of some salted meats and other vegetables lending the yellow concussions a nice appetizing color. There were also pile of potatoes rubbed with some sort of herb she was not familiar with, all mixed in with shredded corned beef. Along the side was a slice of ham with dark brown griddle lines that still wafted steam, some strips of juicy thick-cut bacon that glistened with grease and half a dozen finger-sized sausage links grilled to perfection. There was a dish for butter between them, along with salt, pepper, and small flask of honey along with a bottle of store-bought ketchup. 2 glasses of orange juice was placed within reach of the 2 diners along with a medium glass jug filled with more of the cool fruit juice. A small woven basket with a red and white plated cover made up the centerpiece of the table, and based off the heat and smell it was most likely filled with fresh baked bread. Taking another bite of her food, Ino fought back a groan of pleasure as her taste buds triggered all sorts of pleasant reward pathways in her brain. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" she demanded as she shoveled down another forkful. "If you ever quit being a ninja you should go be a chef." Cracking a smile, the blonde male prepped his own coffee, which mainly consisted of a spoonful of sugar and a dash of cream. He liked his strong. "Why is everyone always surprised when they learn that I can cook?" Ino waved her fork in his face as she swallowed another before answering. "Well duh. Mister, I eat nothing but ramen. You ate nothing but ichirakus when you were younger. The natural assumption would be that you can't cook to save your life." Chuckling as he buttered the bread roll he had taken out of the basket, Naruto grunted in satisfaction as he sank his teeth into the warm hearty grain. "About the only pleasure in life you can afford as an orphan is good food," he replied with a careless shrug. "I got good at cooking real young. I just went to Ichiraku so I wouldn't have to be alone." Feeling her own spirits dim somewhat at the reminder of her friend's difficult childhood, Ino continued eating the delicious meal albeit at a slower pace. "I can't imagine what that was like," she said sadly as she recalled how she had not exactly been the kindest person to the blonde seated across from her when they were younger. Surprisingly, Naruto simply laughed it off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't worry about it, Ino-chan. Leave the past in the past. I'm doing all right now and I've got you guys." Smiling at his infectious grin and genuinely upbeat outlook on life, Ino resolved not to bring the mood down with her own feelings. The two continued eating in companionable silence, quickly demolishing the enormous breakfast set out before them. They made idle chit-chat for a while about all sorts of random topics, Naruto regaling her with tales from his exploits under the tutelage of the Toad Hermit, and Ino in turn filling him in with all the latest village gossip. "Really?" shouted Naruto after he had finally cleared his throat from a choking fit he had suffered through after Ino had dropped a bombshell on him while he had been drinking juice. "Kakashi-sensei and the Snake Lady. Why? They make a cute couple," defended Ino. "You the man Kakashi," mumbled Naruto while wiping his mouth. "Must have a brass pair. She's not that bad once you get to know her," laughed Ino. Seeing the disbelieving look directed at her across the table, the Yamanaka crossed her arm in a huff. "Seriously, she's a bit exuberant but once you get past that she's nice enough." Unable to sustain a straight face while being confronted with Naruto's silly look of disbelief, the blonde girl broke into a fit of giggles. "Stop it." "Stop what?" he asked innocently as he grinned back at her from across the rim of his glass of juice. "That." Curling his lip, he gave a distorted sneer back at her, causing her to erupt into a new bout of laughter. The two blondes fell into a cycle of triggering each other's laughter with their own. After a few minutes they finally managed to pause long enough to catch their breaths. "So," began Naruto, "about last night." Instantly all the levity left the table, replaced by an awkwardness that hung in the air like a sticky fog. Right, there was still that giant white elephant parading in the room waving its ass in their face waiting to be dealt with. Ino couldn't help but stare down at her lap in embarrassment as the subject turned to the events of the night before. How much do you remember? He asked tentatively. Heat flooded Ino's cheeks as his question triggered exactly what she had been trying very hard not to think about. Most of the night had been a relative blur. She had gone to a party to celebrate Asuma finally proposing to Kurenai, cementing their relations for good. Somewhere along the way she had hit it off with Naruto rather well and apparently she had followed him home and taken resident in his bed. The rest was evident in the state of the room they had woken in. Not much. Well, that wasn't the entire truth. While the sequence of events was relatively hazy, what was clear in her memory were the activities that had taken place once they had gotten home. It was very apparent from the snatches of what she could recall that Naruto was a very intense and frighteningly focused lover. All that energy he directed into training that allowed him to often tunnel vision to his goals was focused solely for her pleasure the night before, and what little results she could still remember was enough to elicit an embarrassing dampness between her thighs as her crotch ached with desire, her body singing its want to repeat the dirty deeds of the night before. But don't worry, she continued hastily. I won't tell Sakura. The blonde male stared back blankly for a moment before raising his eyebrows in confusion. Thanks. Really though, isn't that the sort of things girls share with each other? Don't let me stop you if you feel like it. Well, I wouldn't want to ruin your chances with forehead, she teased back. The confusion on his face deepened if possible, before understanding flooded it. Well, actually, Ino, I was thinking that maybe you and I could give it a try. Ino froze at his words as she considered her friend sitting across the table. This was not what she had expected as a conversation after a night of drunken passion. Maybe an apology or even another quick tryst between the sheets, but certainly not a proposition for an actual relations. What? She squeaked. But I thought you still liked Sakura. The blonde leaned back against his chair and made a thoughtful noise in the back of his throat. Well, yeah, I did, but I had a lot of time to think about it during my trip with Erosenin, and I've decided to put that behind me. We have a strong friends that I don't want to jeopardize for something stupid, and to be perfectly honest, I don't think we'd make a good couple anyways. Ino continued to stare blankly at Naruto sitting calmly across from her, patiently waiting for her response. Finally she burst into a fit of laughter, grasping her knees with her hands to steady herself as her body shook with mirth. Naruto continued to observe her from his position through bemused eyes. Care to let me in on the joke, Ino-chan? Okay, she gasped out. You got me, Naruto. Good one. She wiped a tear from her eye as another fit of giggles burst uncontrollably from her lips. I'm not joking, Ino. Staring back into serious blue eyes, Ino's brain felt like it was short-circuiting. Crossing her arms on the table, she allowed her head to fall onto them with a dull thunk. Naruto, you're confused, she said in a muffled voice through her arms. We had some great, fantastic, and now you're convinced you're in love with me. It doesn't work that way. Of course it doesn't work that way, he laughed. And I'm not in love with you. I've put a lot of time and thought into it, Ino. Fact is, I don't think I ever liked Sakura for the right reason. I decided long before I came back that I would settle for our friends and move on, and I have. This wasn't exactly my first time. It was mine, mumbled Ino, still in her prone position. Hearing the momentary pause, Ino peeked out between her arms, shielding her face to see Naruto's stunned expression. What? He spluttered. She glared back at him defiantly, feeling her anger rise at his disbelief. And what's that supposed to mean? You think I'm some air-headed slut that spreads her legs for every guy that manages to sweep me off my feet? Was I just an easy lay? She demanded in a dangerous tone. No, that's not it. Protested Naruto with his hands raised defensively. I just thought a beautiful smart girl like you would have had a chance for a more serious relations. Hell, I'd jump at a chance to just take you out on a date, Ino-chan. Ino turned her eyes aside in embarrassment at his frank assessment of her. Truth was, she had more than her share of dates and guys lined up to take her out and no doubt try to get in her pants. Call her a hopeless romantic, but it had just never felt right to move beyond some kissing and heavy petting with someone who wasn't invested in an actual relations with her. Well, until last night anyways, though it seems Naruto was actually considering a relations, something she couldn't quite wrap her brain around. She felt her hands being tugged into a larger pair. His hands were warmer than hers and she could feel calluses on his palms through the searing heat of his flesh, evident of his hard work ethic. Looking up into his blue eyes so full of honesty, Ino couldn't help but flush a little as she felt her body physically react with desire to his rather dominating presence. Look, Ino, he said softly, I'm not demanding anything here. Just give me a chance to take you out. I feel bad enough that we slept together while drunk, and I'd be lying if said the thoughts never crossed my mind, but I never meant to take away your first time when it should have been with someone special. I don't know if I can make that up to you or become that someone special for you, but I'd love to give it a try. Here he smiled, that sweet gentle smile of his, and tightened his hold on her hands, causing a warm pit to open up in her stomach. Butterflies. Hell, they were more like dragonflies. You're a beautiful and intelligent woman that I've always managed to have a lot of fun around, he continued with a genuine grin. Give me a chance to get to know you better. Ino stuttered a bit as her brain failed to come up with a proper response to that. She'd heard it all before, of course. Men of all ages praised her for her beauty and skill. Hell, she'd even had her share of young men serenading her. But never had anyone delivered it with such blatant honesty while looking her straight in the eye without turning their gaze. The tender smile that graced his face as he rubbed circles into the back of her hand with his thumbs caused Ino's insides to melt, and suddenly a very large part of her could not help but wonder why the hell not. I know it's not something you can just give me an answer to on the spot, Naruto continued as he pulled up her hands and brushed her knuckles with a gentle kiss from his lips, unknowingly fanning the desire building up in the young woman rooted to her chair. Why don't you take some time to think about it and we can talk about it again later, okay? Still not trusting herself to form words, Ino simply nodded once and got up from her seat before she fled from Naruto's kitchen. Sakura blew out a sigh of resignation as she finished lecturing the senior man sitting contritely on the paper-covered patient bed about the necessity of taking his medication on time. Honestly, sometimes she wondered what people were thinking. The labels on the pill bottles handed to him a week before when he came in for pneumonia were as clear as instructions could be: take 2 tablets together after every meal. How anyone managed to forget such simple directions when their own life was at risk was truly astounding. After finally relenting in her gentle scolding of the embarrassed elder, she shooed him out with another reminder not to forget to take his medication if he didn't want to have his upper respiratory infection to have a sudden relapse. Scratching away with her pen on the patient form the date and reasons for the visit, she completed the 6 pages of micro font with the ease of someone who had done it hundreds of times before. Making sure the room was as neat as she had found it for the next doctor, she headed back out into the hallway, exchanging a greeting and an eye roll with another doctor who had given her a knowing look. It hadn't been the man's first return visit, and Sakura was willing to bet her month's hospital salary it wouldn't be his last. The pink-haired teenager weaved through the number of patients and hospital staff, making a beeline for the sign-in station. There she filed away her paperwork under her patient's rather extensive file, and made a note in the computer along with the physical copies being archived away. Hard at work, Sakura-chan, chided the kindly matron who was the head nurse of the entire Konoha hospital, a rather prestigious position. A young girl like you should take more time off to have fun with her friends. Sakura laughed as she brushed a stray pink lock from her face and behind her ear. The older woman routinely admonished her for her diligent work habits, but the kunoichi knew the other woman did so in jest. I have plenty of fun with my friends, Masiaki-san. In fact, it's our girls' night out tonight. The older woman clucked her tongue in a reproving fashion, spinning in her wheelie chair so that she could glare playfully at the younger girl. Oh, that's all good, Sakura-chan, but I'm talking about the sort of fun that involves boys your age. What about that young man who's always visiting you at Workham? There's a strapping young lad I would have jumped in an instant if I was 10 years younger. Color flooded Sakura's cheeks as she looked determinedly anywhere but at the nurse. Masiaki-san, she exclaimed, scandalized. You're married. Well, that makes it more fun, doesn't it? Asked the other woman with a cheeky grin. Though in all seriousness, why haven't you thrown the poor boy a bone? Does he have a woman already? Naruto-kun is a teammate, and just a friend, growled Sakura firmly, even as her belly did a small familiar flop as it was so often prone to doing whenever her thoughts strayed to the blonde as of late. Naruto-kun huffing out in annoyance at the teasing, Sakura snorted and tossed her hair back imperiously. Yes, Masiaki-san, a friend. Chuckling, the older woman raised her hands up in surrender and turned back to her own pile of paperwork waiting for attention. If you say so, Sakura-chan. But don't stay in denial too long. A boy like that will be snapped up very quickly by other women if you're not careful. Heat still burning her cheeks, Sakura left the information desk, uncertain as to why her colleague's last statement had left a sinking feeling in her gut. Stewing slightly in her own emotions, she made a beeline for the general admissions desk where she was scheduled to spend her last 4 hours administering to the basic requests of patients who didn't necessarily require an in-depth session to determine their needs. While usually a duty fulfilled by nurses, there was always a doctor on hand to serve as a reference point for when more information or attention was necessary, though given how busy it was, the doctor on call usually ended up working alongside the nurses. Making her way across the hospital, Sakura had the time to really reflect on her relations with her remaining teammate. It had been more than half a year since Naruto had returned from his training trip with Jiraiya, and in that time their friends had strengthened well beyond anything they had before he left. Sakura had been surprised by how much she had missed the goofball while he had been away. Naruto had always had a way of cheering her up at just the right moment with his bright and admittedly often very loud personality, something she sorely missed over the past 3 years. She had kept her focus on her studies, but more than once she had wished her blonde-haired teammate had been around. His return had heralded a much more quiet though no less positive personality change and a deeper maturity than most people had thought him possible. And when Sakura could put aside fighting the butterflies in her own stomach long enough to be objective about it, then yes, even she could see how much more handsome the blonde had become. Gone was the baby fat, replaced by lean hard muscle that rippled subtly beneath his clothing regardless of what he was wearing, and a face that had left behind childhood in favor of a more masculine overtone. The shorter than average blonde had shot up into a broad-shouldered male whose height and width was only matched by Kiba out of all the men in their graduating year. Sakura was still getting used to having to look up when talking to her teammate. There was also a certain hardness in his eyes that hadn't been present before. The way he carried himself screamed of a change she couldn't quite put her finger on, but when their eyes did meet she often felt a shiver down her spine. She still wasn't sure if it was a good one. Arriving at the station, Sakura was so lost in her thoughts that she ran headlong into the nurse leaving her shift. Being a kunoichi, Sakura easily regained her balance, but the other woman was not so skilled and tumbled to the floor with a squeak of fright. Fuchio-san, I'm so sorry, exclaimed Sakura as she reached down to help the other nurse. I should have been paying more attention to where I was going. Are you alright? Mito Fuchio was only a year or two older than Sakura herself, but boasted a bust line that could have rivaled Tsunade's, something that Sakura was secretly rather envious of. Coupled with an almost inhuman hourglass-shaped figure and a face that would not have looked out of place on a magazine cover, it was no secret why she was the favorite nurse amongst the male patients at the hospital. With that sort of a body, it would have been no surprise if the other female staff would dislike her simply for that, but she had such a sweet, disarming personality that even the most grudge-prone individual would have trouble disliking her. "Oh, Sakura-san, I didn't see you there," she laughed as she regained her feet with Sakura's help. "I'm all right, just a bit of a fright from out little bump in there." The other girl's laugh was infectious and Sakura found herself giggling as well. "Are you off your shift soon, Fuchio-san?" "Oh please, Sakura-san, no need to be so formal. Call me Mito. In fact, I'm off as soon as I sign out." Smiling at the other nurse who had her clipboard clutched to her rather voluptuous chest, Sakura gave a polite bow. "Of course, Mito-san. I hope you have a nice afternoon." "Sakura-san, I had a question I was hoping you could answer." Sakura looked on with curious eyes as the other woman seemed to suddenly take on a bashful posture, hooking her hands behind her back and looking down on the ground. "How can I help you, Mito-san?" the kunoichi asked encouragingly. Unlike shinobi, civilians she found often had to be prompted when they mean to ask for something. "You are teammates with Naruto-kun, correct?" Fighting the sudden unease that had filled her form, Sakura nodded slowly in affirmation. "Is he single?" The rather blunt and unexpected question left Sakura's mouth hanging slightly as Mito continued avoiding her gaze, a hint of pink flooding her cheeks. "Wah!" spluttered Sakura incoherently. "You Naruto, huh?" The chesty nurse bit her lip and turned sad eyes up to look at the kunoichi. "It's hard for me to find an honest man, harder still to find one who can speak to me while looking me in the eyes rather than, well, elsewhere. I've had chance to talk with Naruto-kun a few times while he visited you here and I'd like the chance to get to know him better if there isn't a woman in his life already." Sincere though the words were, there was a hint of a challenging look in her eyes that Sakura couldn't quite place. Of course that didn't stop her hackles from rising slightly. Ruthlessly crushing the sudden surge of aggression, Sakura mentally shook her head to get her bearings. "Well," she said hesitantly, "as far as I know he's single." The worried expression on Mito's face brightened up like a ray of sunshine through rain clouds. Smiling happily, the other girl bowed to Sakura with an exclamation of thanks before heading off with a wave of her hand, humming softly as she left. Sakura stood there watching the other woman's retreating back, trying desperately to relax the clenched fist her free hand had unconsciously formed. Breathing out a disbelieving sigh, Sakura decided to put the event behind her, cataloging her reaction to the unexpected news of her colleague's attraction to her teammate to be sorted through and examined at a later time. Marching into the desk station, Sakura penned in her name and time at the sign-in board, giving a nod of greeting to the other hospital worker before snatching up the next client form. The name on the top of the paper caused her eyebrows to shoot up as she recognized her longtime rival's untidy scrawl even without the need to see Ino Yamanaka in the name box. Flipping through the pages of personal information that was standard for all patients to fill out, she got to the point of the reason for the visit. Sakura's jaws dropped again as she saw the paperwork signed with Ino's unmistakable signature for the morning after pill. "Ino." Her normally neutral announcer voice when calling out the next patient's name came out more as a disbelieving cry that startled most the patients in the waiting room into looking at the pink-haired kunoichi. Barely noticing the reproachful look her superior was giving her, Sakura spotted her blonde friend in the crowd as the other kunoichi had looked up at the call of her name. Ino for her part had taken one look at Sakura before uttering an audible groan and dropping her head into her hands before standing up and closing in on her friend at the desk. "Ino," Sakura hissed in a much lower voice once her friend was closer, "what the hell? Morning after pill, who did you?" The blonde kunoichi whose casual strut up to the station had attracted more than one stray eye to her shapely behind groaned again. "Look, it's a long story. I'll tell you guys tonight when we get together, alright? I need your opinions on something anyways." Shaking her head in disbelief, Sakura hurriedly grabbed the proper medication, double-checking the dosage label before popping out 2 of the green pills and handing it to her friend along with a paper cup filled to the brim with water. What happened to waiting for the right man? Sakura demanded. You weren't dating anyone last I checked. The blonde tossed back the pills with a gulp of the water and winced at the way the medication rattled in her esophagus on the way down, washing away her discomfort with the remaining water. Well, obviously that went out the window, grumbled Ino as she crushed the paper cup and tossing it in a nearby waste basket. Throwing her long blonde hair back over her shoulder, Ino leaned down onto the desk station with her hands pressed up against her temples. Ugh, what am I going to do? She groaned. You did use protection, didn't you? Demanded Sakura with probing eyes. These morning after pills aren't 100% effective. Oh yeah, mumbled Ino, still facing down at the wooden surface. Believe me he used protection all right. Quite a few in fact. Blushing slightly at the rather uncomfortable topic, Sakura wasn't sure whether to comfort her friend or slap some sense into her. Ino look, I don't want to have to tell the story more than once, grumbled Ino as she finally looked back up. We're still on for a Mikey's tonight at 9 with the girls, right? Nodding dumbly, Sakura could only watch through numb eyes as her friend walked out of the room, shoulders weighed down heavily by the events that were no doubt plaguing her. Suddenly her own fluctuating feelings on her teammate seemed like a small problem in comparison. A Mikey's was a popular hangout for young shinobi who weren't quite elite enough to get into the Junin and Anbu exclusive bars, but were skilled enough to be recognized as the next up-and-coming generation of ninja who would one day rise to protect their village. The atmosphere to the bar was warm if not a bit dark, but then people of their profession tended to like it darker than most. The soft ambient background music was just loud enough to be soothing, but not so loud that it was distracting. A simple noise to be tuned out by the patrons that frequented the popular watering hole, but it did its job of masking away conversations to make eavesdropping more difficult. There were dozens of tables that were scattered across the center of the relatively large room, strategically placed so that no one group had to feel completely exposed to another thanks to some handy wooden dividers. Lined up along the walls was the bar table with dozens upon dozens of stools for those who wished to drink away their misery alone, the racks furthest against the wall filled with rows upon rows of alcoholic beverages of all sorts from across the continent. The slow-moving ceiling fans often were not enough to help push the humidity caused by the large crowds of shinobi who frequented a Mikey's at night, but nobody seemed to particularly mind the slight discomfort. For those who did, the company of friends was enough to divert them from the small distraction. There was a stairwell that led up to a partial second floor. Where the center tiles should have been there were none, cut out so that the ground level was exposed. Along the walls of the second floor was a small walkway that heralded a dozen or so shinobi leaning up against the railings having a smoke and observing the crowd milling below. But of interest to most was the number of closed doors that led to the more private rooms clients could rent out should they feel a need for more solitude and could afford the expensive hourly fees in exchange for their privacy. Room 4C was one that was frequented by many shinobi, though perhaps none as often as its current inhabitants. Though their group was not as of yet complete, just having Tenten, Tamari and Hinata in the enclosed space was enough to produce a noise level most associated with an out-of-control party. The funny thing being that the alcohol had yet to be touched. Seriously, Hinata, jeered Tenten, you've been dating the poor boy for almost 2 years now, you really should put out and reward him for his efforts. The red-faced Hyuga heiress poked her forefingers together in a rapid beat, a habit she had yet to break when she was nervous or faced with a particularly distressing situation that didn't involve life-threatening circumstances. And not every relations has to be about S10-chan, admonished the lavender-eyed girl. It had been a surprise to everyone when shy Hinata, who had a painfully obvious crush the size of the Hokage monument on their resident blonde knucklehead, had gone and agreed to go out with Choji of all people. More surprising was perhaps the fact that 2 years later the two were quite happily going steady to the approval of both their clans. Is that what he tells you? Teased the kunoichi hailing from Suna with a leer. Cause that's not what he's thinking with the way you look. Hinata gave a squeak of distress as she folded her arms across her rather ample chest. Out of all the girls of their group, Hinata had always had the distinct lead in body shape. Over the years, that lead had just simply widened to the point where the desire of overtaking her had changed to hopes of simply getting anywhere near her. While the heiress tried desperately to hide her womanly shape behind baggy clothing and even resorted to wearing a parka in the middle of summer, there was just no hiding her definition. Or as Kiba often put it, Kami didn't grace her with such a figure to be hidden. Seriously, Hinata-chan, you should just let the poor boy have a taste. Maybe then he'll find an appetite for something other than food. Iha Avenue let him Ha Avenue a taste. Hinata shot back defiantly, her face color matching that of a tomato. Both the other occupants of the room sat up straighter at her nervous declaration, eyes alight with interest. Hinata was the only one out of all of them who had a steady boyfriend, yet she remained tight-lipped about anything the couple got up to. A rare opportunity to grill the girl had just unexpectedly presented itself. Oh yeah, when was this? How far did you two go? The two questions came together at the same time and Hinata seemed to wilt under the weight of their words. She opened her mouth to stutter out some defensive reply, but was interrupted with the slamming of the door. The occupants in the room all jumped and turned to stare at the heavily breathing pink-haired apprentice of the Godime Hokage. Her short hair was windswept and disheveled, as if she had been sprinting at high speeds. The light sheen of sweat only added to her appearance of having rushed to get here. Whoa, where's the fire? Demanded Tamari. Sakura was the more level-headed one in their group, and anything that had her sprinting her ass off probably meant troubling news. Where's Ino? Panted Sakura as she collapsed onto the space next to Hinata. Did she get here yet? Accepting an offered glass of water from Hinata gratefully, Sakura proceeded to chug it down in one go. Polishing off the water, she stuck the cup back out for another refill. Ino? Asked Tenten, eyeing the pinkette curiously. She hasn't gotten here yet. Did something happen? Yes, shrieked the only girl of Team 7, ignoring her refilled glass. She came in requesting the morning after pill today. Hinata, who had been taking a sip of water from her own cup to calm her nerves after having narrowly escaped her own private interrogation session, sprayed the contents of her mouth out in shock. Tamari, having seated herself right across from the heiress, gave a shrieked curse of surprise at the unexpected shower. What the hell? Wah, what? Ha, I knew it. The last triumphant cry came from Tenten, drawing odd stares from the other occupants in the room. The weapon mistress turned her Cheshire grin at her rival from Suna and thrust her palm out, face up. What did I tell you, Tamari? Pay up, girl. The fan user groaned and slammed her head on the table with a dull wet thump where skull met wood. God damn it, Ino, she moaned. What are you guys talking about? Demanded Sakura in confusion, her eyes darting between the two women. We had a bet going, elaborated Tenten while making a V sign with her left hand. Whether miss I'm going to stay a virgin until I marry my man will really be able to go through with it. The disciple of Guy prodded the still face-down Tamari using her free hand, a gleeful smile adorning her face. Tamari here thought she could do it, I thought she couldn't. We put down an A-rank mission's worth of pay on the line to see who would be right. Guess who's suddenly a whole lot richer? That whore, growled Tamari as she reached into her purse to pull out the bills needed to honor her bet. Do we know how him? Asked a curious Hinata, who had finally recovered from the unexpected news. I don't know, moaned Sakura. She wouldn't say. She'll tell us what happened tonight, she said. Tenten licked her finger and began to gleefully count away at the wad of bills Tamari had forked over, her eyes practically gleaming with greed and satisfaction. Who cares who it was? grumbled Tamari as she poured herself a saucer of the sake. Normally they waited until everyone was present to begin serving and drinking, but after having just lost about a month's worth of income because of Ino, Tamari wasn't feeling particularly charitable to her fellow blonde. But guys, this was her first time, exclaimed Sakura with worry coloring her tone. She wasn't dating anyone, so it was probably with someone she didn't even really care all that much about. She must be devastated. So she finally boinked a guy, snorted Tenten after pocketing the cash and helping herself to a saucer of alcohol as well. It's nothing that special. If it really was her first time, it probably wasn't even all that fun, especially if the guy was a virgin too. That's not the point, growled Sakura. There is no point. Tenten shot back with a roll of her eyes. Not everyone thinks is special like you rookie 9 girls. It's just an itch that needs scratching. And Ino finally got it scratched. Good for her. Tenten, hissed Sakura, disapproval fierce in her eyes. Come on Haruno, grumbled Tamari as she served the remaining 2 girls. The kunoichi from Suna tended to revert to surnames when she was annoyed with people. I'm the one who's from the prudish society that frowns on anything even remotely ual in nature, and I'm telling you, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that simple, insisted Sakura with an angry shake of her head. The pink-haired girl glared around the table, but only saw defiance from the older girls and a desperate avoidance of eye contact from Hinata. She opened her mouth to reiterate the point that the psychological consequences for Ino might be much harder to brush off than for Tamari and Tenten, who had a much more casual approach to the act of copulation. But before the words could properly formulate and leave her mouth, the doorway slid open once more to reveal the rather disheveled-looking girl they had been discussing. The normally fashion-conscious Yamanaka was wearing clothing that was slightly rumpled-looking, hinting that perhaps she had not changed at all, and her hair, while brushed, did not have its usual glossy sheen. Cheers to popping your cherry, toasted Tenten, getting an eye roll from Ino as she sealed the entryway. Geez, tell the world, why don't you? The Yamanka growled as she took a seat closest to the door. And pour me a damn drink, will you? Hinata carefully filled her friend's saucer of sake and handed it over to the blonde, who promptly knocked it back in one shot. So who was it? Demanded Tenten eagerly with an impish glint in her eyes. Anyone we know. Tenten, shouted Sakura with a glare. That's enough. Ino, don't listen to her, you don't need to tell us anything. We're here for you. The blonde in question mumbled something under her breath and waggled her empty saucer at Hinata. There was a slightly distant look in her eyes that made the girls share a glance of worry. Hey Ino, said the weapons mistress carefully, it was consented, right? Both Hinata and Sakura gasped as they looked at their friend in horror, and even Tamari had pulled herself out of her funk over losing money enough to cast a concerned gaze at the younger blonde. Yeah, Ino said after a lengthy pause. We were both drunk out of our minds, but yeah, it was consented on my part. The tension left the room somewhat, though not entirely, given the mood Ino was still in. So what's wrong, Ino? Asked Tamari. He bad in bed or something? The other girls all watched with interest as Ino blushed profusely and stuttered out something that couldn't be understood. After a few moments, the Yamanaka gave up and snatched the bottle of sake from Hinata to give herself a refill, avoiding looking anyone in the eye. Well, drawled Tenten with a grin, that answers that. So what's cutting you up, blondie? Again Ino mumbled something incoherent, and the other girls exchanged confused looks. Come again, said Sakura. I said he wants to try for a real relations, grounded out Ino with a heavy glare at her sake saucer as if the poor cup was the source of all her frustrations. Oh, that's a good teeing, right? Asked Hinata hopefully. Given Ino's sour expression, it obviously was not, but someone had to be the optimist, and Hinata was the least likely to get slapped down for it. Yes. No. I don't know, groaned Ino, burying her face in her arms. That's what's got me so confused. I mean, I know the guy, but I've never really thought of him that way before. He's a sweet guy, but just never to me. I don't know. I don't like him, but I could like him. And he seems to like me. Maybe I want to like him. Or maybe that's the great talking. I don't know. This is all his fault. ARRGH. It seems once she started talking, Ino broke down into an incoherent mess of words that gave away all her inner turmoil. It was a good thing they had rented out their own room. Having Ino scream and pull at her own hair probably would have gotten them thrown out eventually. The only questions would have been whether the Anbu with the straitjacket would come before or after they were booted out of the building. Wait, so if you know him, does that mean we know him? Asked Tamari slowly. Is it Shika? Cut in Tenten eagerly. That question earned her a glare and a kick under the table from a scowling Tamari. The San Kunoichi's budding relations with the shadow user was best described as lukewarm, though that didn't stop the blonde from being aggressive towards any woman showing an interest in the younger man. What? Asked Ino with a look of slight disgust. You know, Shika's like a brother to me. We grew up together. Yeah, so? Asked Tenten. Not all of us are open to the thought of sleeping with our teammates, grounded out Sakura with a frosty glare at the bun-haired girl. It was common knowledge that Team 9 was closer than most. Close as in the three members had decided that shared bedroom activity was a good team-building exercise. No one wanted to know more beyond that, in fact probably even that little tidbit should be considered TMI. Tenten shrugged dismissively. Well, you don't know what you're missing out on. So who is it? Probed Hinata gently. Naruto. There was a collective pause as the room fell into stunned silence. In the momentary stillness, the single ceiling fan in the room buffeting air with its dull wooden blades seemed unnaturally loud. What? The collective echoing cry was loud enough that even the outside noise seemed to pause for a moment. No doubt the people downstairs had been distracted by the synchronized screech from room 4C, the supposedly soundproof room. Tenten was practically rolling on the floor with hysterical laughter, tears leaking down the side of her face while she pointed a finger at Ino while gasping out random words or phrases that really wasn't intelligible in any way. Tamari had both her eyebrows up so far towards her hairline she resembled her youngest brother's features as she glanced pensively at her fellow blonde, but most surprising was Hinata, who didn't seem too upset about the discovery that her friend had slept with her former crush. The pink-haired girl of the group had fallen silent, her eyes unmoving as she stared down at the table, soft words breaking past her lips that was too low for the rest to be heard. I know, moaned Ino. Look, don't touch, but damn if I didn't touch. Downing another saucer of the belly-warming liquid, Ino turned an apologetic look to Hinata. I'm so sorry, Hinata. I swear to Kami I had no idea what I was doing at the time. Can you ever forgive me? The voluptuous heiress simply gave her friend a sad smile of reassurance. It's all right, Ino-chan. I've gotten over the fact court that Naruto-kun and I will never be anything more than friends. I have Choji now. Tenten finally managed to regain her seat at the table and had wiped the last of the tears that had streamed down her face. So tell me, Ino-chan, how big was he? Oh my god, Tenten, shrieked Sakura even as Ino flushed a deeper red. I do not need to hear this. Tamari chuckled at the flustered blonde from Konoha. He really is hung like a horse, isn't he? Whoa, wait, hold up, shouted Tenten as she made a crossed X shape with her arms. And how in the hell would you know about the horse-like quality of Naruto's? Tamari gave a nonchalant shrug as she took another sip of her saucer. Naruto and I had a brief fling when he and Jiraiya swung by Suna. Wait, what? Shouted Sakura and Ino together in stereo. A fling? Demanded Tenten. When the hell was this and how long did you two go out for? Hell, why did you two even go out for? I didn't even know you had an interest in him. I was the former Cage's daughter, and the current one's sister. You know, the guy who just a few years back were regarded as a homicidal maniac who murdered people on a whim. That kinda relation isn't exactly stellar for a girl's love life. Naruto's the only one who didn't give two craps about my background and about the only guy who would stand up to Gaara when it came down to it. Hell yeah, I jumped him. You're lying, accused Tenten, yanking our chain. There is no way in hell you and Naruto had gotten together. I refuse to believe that. The Suna noble gave a uncaring shrug. Believe what you will. Though tell me Ino, does this look familiar? Tamari pulled up the end of her tight black figure-hugging shorts, peeling the clingy material until her creamy thigh was exposed to the air. On the inside, half an inch away from the delicate folds of her maidenhood, was a small unobtrusive tattoo of a raccoon, stylized in a cartoonish fashion. Ino dropped her head back into her arms with a groan after staring in disbelief. What the hell does she mean, Ino? Demanded Tenten. Naruto's got a matching one on his thigh, mumbled the face-down blonde. Does Gaara know? Demanded Sakura. Tamari smirked. He found out eventually. Last I checked, Naruto and Gaara are still practically best friends, said Tenten slowly. The kunoichi from Suna laughed. Well, Gaara approved. I think he was severely disappointed when it turned out neither of us had a long-term relations in mind. Don't think he would have minded having Naruto as a brother-in-law. Here the older kunoichi broke out into a wistful sigh as she conjured up an image of the current Naruto in her mind's eye. Maybe I was being a bit short-sighted. Tenten finally shook off her disbelief with a throaty chuckle. Well, seems little Naru-chan's quite the man. With two endorsements like that, I wouldn't mind taking him out for a ride. Too bad it seems he has a thing for blondes. Looks like we never stood a chance. Hinata. Hinata, who had remained mostly quiet so far, turned and glared at her friend rebelliously. He's not just into blondes. It took a moment for what the shy girl in their group had mumbled to fully sink in. No, stuttered Sakura as both blondes in the group gaped at their pale-eyed friend. No, just no. No friggin' way. When? What the hell is this? Complained Tenten with a scowl. I thought I was supposed to be the slut in the group. You know, slept with both my teammates. Hinata, cried a disbelieving Ino, you're been with Choji for 2 years. It was the night before he left, mumbled the raven-haired Hyuga, reverting back into her more shy mode as her courage failed her again. I went to confess to him my feelings, fearing I would lose him forever otherwise. And he took advantage of you? Demanded Sakura angrily. In her mind she was already preparing to pound her teammate's face in. Best friend or not, she wasn't going to let him getting away with coercing Hinata into giving away her virginity like that. No, replied Hinata with a faraway look. He told me he had always kn no own. But we so old never be together back cause of what he was. Wait, said Ino slowly, so you knew all the way back then that he held the Kyuubi? The shy heiress nodded an affirmative. I understood finally he never gave me any hope. Okay, that's nice and all with all the touchy-feely crap, interrupted Tenten impatiently. But how exactly did this lead to you two making the beast with two backs? Again the next in line for the leaders of the Hyuga clan flushed a deep red, turning her gaze to avoid eye contact with her friends. I told I am, that if I couldn't avenue him for my Li Ife, then I would at least Li Ike to have him for one night. And of course being the nice guy he is, grumbled Ino with a sarcastic scowl, he agreed. Is that why you won't let Choji go all the way? Don't want to be disappointed? Asked a curious Tamari. Cause I know from personal experience that Naruto sets the bar pretty damn high. Okay, who has not slept with Naruto here? Raise your hand, demanded Tenten. Am I the only one? Sakura, have you slept with him too? No, I just, what the hell? Shouted the Pinkett, face aghast with emotions. Okay, now that we've established the fact that Naruto is in fact a man slut, ground out Ino, that really still doesn't help me answer my question. Now hold up, that's rather unfair, defended Tenten. All we've established is that he's slept with you Tamari and Hinata, all on separate occasions in a 3-year interval. That hardly qualifies him to be a man slut. Those 3 are the only ones that we know of, muttered Sakura darkly. Who knows how many girls he met during his training trip. Again, not helping, grumbled Ino with a glower at the thought. Seriously though, what the hell should I do? I think you should give him a chance, said Tamari with a shrug. He really is a sweet guy, loyal to a fault. A bit clueless, but A for effort where it counts. Let me know if you don't want him, Ino, said Tenten with mischievous glint in her eyes. 'Cause now you've got me all curious. If you're not riding that bronco, I'm gonna give a shot at him. Winking at Sakura, Tenten's smile turned evil. Come on, Sakura. 3 out of 5 of us have taken him for a ride. What say we make a group experience we can all share about? You and me can go give Ino's boy toy a night he won't forget. Ino glared back at her dark-haired friend, raising her left hand in a silent one-finger salute as a reply, getting a bark of laugh from Tenten even as Sakura shot daggers back with her eyes. "Ith think de Temari's right," said Hinata, adding her own 2 cents on the matter. "What do you think, Sakura?" asked Ino. "You've known him the longest." Sakura toyed with her own untouched saucer of sake, staring down into her own reflection in the liquor. A profound sense of sadness radiated from the green eyes that looked back out from the liquid. It was odd, really. Back when Naruto had pestered her for a date on a daily basis, she had practically dreamed of a day like this when he would finally get a girlfriend and leave her all alone with Sasuke. Though she had come to think of her blonde teammate as a friend by then, she had nonetheless imagined it as one of the happiest days of her life. Now that the day was here, Sasuke was the furthest thing from her mind. A tight feeling of jealousy burned in her chest at the thought of Ino being with Naruto, stronger than any feeling she had during the days of rivalry with the blonde over the Uchiha. Sasuke had been a thing to have, the newest latest fashionable handbag a girl could drag about to watch the envy ooze from the eyes of other girls. Losing Naruto was a blow straight to the gut that made her want to heave bile. When had Naruto's dating life suddenly mattered so much to her? Sakura, prompted Ino warily, seeing the stormy expression on her longtime friend's face. I don't know, the Mednin mumbled at last. I really don't. I guess it wouldn't hurt to give it a shot, muttered Ino after a long moment. Besides, it's not like I'm in love with the guy. We'd just go out on a few dates, get to know each other a bit more. I bet we're not even all that compatible and it'll fizzle out after a while. Tenten rolled her eyes as she poured the last of the sake. Hello, horse. The Yamanaka flushed and threw her empty saucer at the weapons specialist, who easily dodged with a laugh. Somehow that small action broke the tension that had been hanging over the group like an unpleasant fog, and the festive air that was more common to their get-togethers came back in full force. Though they laughed and drank away merrily enough, a certain pink-haired kunoichi couldn't quite put all her heart behind the drunken toasts for long years of happiness between the new blonde couple. There surely would be the sounds of many breaking hearts in the village once it became official, though the tinkle and cracking of one in particular could already be heard. Ino stretched her hands lazily above her head, lacing her manicured fingers together as she worked at the kink on her back. Fighting desperately not to give in to the yawn threatening to escape her mouth, she blinked back tears from the effort it took to contain the often unstoppable biological phenomenon. Giving in to mental fatigue, Ino allowed her head to drop dully onto her desk with enough force to cause her to wince. Catching sight of the pink rubbery eraser ending of her pencil in her periphery, Ino s out her tongue to draw in the offending stationery into mouth. Absent-mindedly chewing on the eraser, she sent the pencil tip waggling through the air in wild figure 8. After the amusement at her own actions had worn off, the tired teenager allowed her exhausted mind to wander. Working in the IT department was supposed to be interesting and a stimulating challenge for her intellect. When there was an active time-sensitive case going on, that was true, but when there wasn't, she really didn't care that there had been a 0.4% increase in the food requisition orders from Mizu, and she sure as hell didn't care to write a 30-page report speculating on why that might be the case. It wasn't like anyone was going to actually read it, the Hokage clearly didn't. And the monotony wasn't just limited to the paperwork, even their uniforms reflected the dreariness of their department. Why gray? It countered everything fashionable, and putting that aside, the drab color simply weighed on the mind like concrete anchors. Not exactly the type of stimulant you wanted in a workplace that emphasized having an agile mind to analyze data and intelligence reports. A brief glance around showed her fellow floor staff was hardly faring any better. She was seated on one of 20 desks placed in a 5-row by 4-column formation where the majority of the intelligence officers sat to sift through the tons of information gathered by shinobi out in the field. The cookie-cutter workstations were made of solid metal, complete with squeaky drawers on both sides for endless files full of aged papers that hardly ever saw light. The solid mahogany finish for the top of the desks was a nice touch though, a pigment of color in an otherwise dull black and white snapshot of the intelligence and torture department. The IT employees were trapped in an underground facility, a strategic decision made mainly to demoralize prisoners who never got to see anything but the 4 walls of their cell and the hallways leading to their interrogation cells. But what the designers hadn't kept in mind was how the environment would affect the people working there. While they did get to go home after work, unlike the detainees, the majority of their day was still spent facing those same depressing architecture. Not exactly motivation for work productivity. While there were no windows to gaze out of, that certainly didn't stop people from zoning off. It was early afternoon, slightly after the lunch hour. One of those warm hazy days that made you want to curl up under the shade of a tree in a park with a good book or perhaps watch the clouds roll by. Most of the staff was still recovering from slight food comas, so it wasn't surprising to see vacant stares aimed at anything but the paperwork. Noticing how a few of her male coworkers had been sneakily sending her glances, Ino frowned and hastily put her arms back down. Being an attractive young woman, Ino was rather partial to being complimented for her beauty through wordless admiration, but that didn't mean she wanted to be ogled like a piece of meat at every turn. There was appreciation for beauty and ogling. She didn't mind the first, but the latter made her hackles rise and her stomach revolt. Idly tapping her pencil against the tabletop, she allowed her mind to continue roaming away from her current assigned task. And as it so often did these past few days, the first thing that came to mind was a certain blonde goofball she had ended up in bed with the weekend prior. It had been an odd week for Ino since she had decided to give Naruto a chance, mainly because she hadn't seen the boys since the morning after they had roused from their night of X-rated activities. Waking up to an epic hangover from her outing with the girls the night before, Ino had cleaned herself up and marched on over to Naruto's house to tell him that she'd be willing to let him take her on one date. Just one. When she didn't receive an answer after knocking for a few minutes, she had assumed that he had already left his home. Wandering through the few locations he hung out at that she knew of, namely Team 7's training field, Ichiraku Ramen stand and the Hokage's tower, she had seen neither hide nor hair of the Jinchuriki. More than a little miffed at his sudden vanishing act, Ino had stormed off to find Sakura to see if she knew where her teammate was. An annoyed and harassed-looking Sakura had informed her that the blonde in question had apparently been appropriated for an A-class mission the night before. Something about infiltrating one of the minor shinobi villages in order to retrieve a man Konoha wanted to ask some very pointed questions towards. The disappointment that pooled in the bottom of her stomach was brushed aside hurriedly as she did not want to examine her own feelings on the matter too closely. Instead, Ino had told herself that it was probably a good thing that she wouldn't be seeing him for a while. Time and space would give her a better perspective on what was going on between them. It hadn't exactly worked out like she hoped given her mind's penitence for fixating on the nine-tailed demon's host. A pair of warm hands clapped themselves over Ino's eyes, startling her out of her sleepy funk. It took a monumental effort to suppress the instinctive response to smash the back of her head against her assailant's nose to disorient them. But she was in friendly territory, so the chances that someone was trying to kill her was pretty low, and binding the eyes would hardly be the first choice for most assassins. If that someone was trying to kill her, the fact that she hadn't sensed anything up until that moment meant they could have left her dead without her even realizing it. Plus the warm, rough-skinned palms were tantalizingly familiar. Guess who, Ino-chan? The low throaty rumble was akin to a large predatory feline's purr. Coupled with the warm breath tickling her ear, the spine-tingling combination sent her pulse racing. A pleasant shudder threatened to escape, making the poor Yamanaka want to squirm in her seat, but she wouldn't allow him to have the satisfaction of getting to her. Let me think about that, she pondered aloud with a sly grin that she knew he couldn't see. Does it happen to be a blonde loudmouth who has a hideous fetish for orange? Oi, it's not a fetish. And orange is awesome, the faceless voice of her captivation protested. The hands left her eyes and instead dropped down to her shoulders, where they began a sensual rhythmic kneading motion that drew a soft moan from the seated young woman. Leaning back in her chair, Ino closed her eyes and allowed her fellow blonde's skillful hands to quickly work away at the kink she had been desperately trying to get rid of. Waves of pleasure rolled through her as her body crooned its approval. Oh, yeah, right there. Her instructional groans devolved into meaningless sounds of satisfaction as Naruto continued working away at all her sore spots with the attention of a master masseuse. Real kinky, you too. If I closed my eyes, I can almost imagine my bedroom a couple of nights ago, cut in a sultry voice, interrupting Ino's blissful moment of distraction. Dark lavender eyes popped open and Ino felt herself flush slightly when she noticed how quite a few of her colleagues were red around the cheeks and desperately trying to avoid looking at the two intimately positioned teenagers. Glaring slightly at the purple-haired woman who was smirking at her, Ino stuck out her tongue childishly at her superior. Real mature response there, Yamanaka, snorted Mitarashi Anko. The snake mistress hadn't changed much since they first met her as Genin. She still sported the tan trench coat along with the semi-transparent fishnet underclothing that left nothing to the imagination. The shadowed form of her was just teasingly out of view, giving the impression of erect buds when the light struck her at the right angle. The only notable difference was that Anko had allowed her hair grow out to shoulder length, something that started back when she first started sleeping regularly with Kakashi. The one-time apprentice of the Snake Sanin was a sabotage and assassination specialist, but when she wasn't off killing someone or slipping mercury into a well somewhere, she hung out in the IT department. Of course, she was much too temperamental to be given paperwork, so she spent most her time either intimidating the prisoners for fun or helping Ibiki pour boiling tar on some poor inmate's chest. She didn't have any official rank within the intelligence department as she had never sat through the exams, but she was widely accepted as the unofficial second in command in interrogation. The physical aspects of it at any rate. You're just jealous Kakashi would never give you a massage, shot back an amused Naruto as he continued the circular motions of his thumb on Ino's trapezius. The Mind Walker couldn't help but marvel at the ripples of relaxation that was coursing through her being from that one simple motion. He massages me in other places, sang Anko with a knowing gleam in her eyes. I can teach you if you want, Naruto-chan. Naruto shivered slightly as he crossed his arms protectively over Ino's chest in a slight hug, careful to keep his hands away from anything inappropriate. Yeah, let's not even go there. It's just wrong in so many ways. Why? Asked a genuinely surprised Anko. I'm sure Kakashi would be open to that sort of thing. Yeah, well, I'm not, grumbled back the blonde male with another comical shudder. Though I have to ask, does he keep his mask on when you two? Anko threw her head back and laughed. Only one way you'll ever find out, little man. Naruto raised his hands in a warding motion. Yeah, not that interested. You get that guy we nabbed all squared away yet? Sure did, Uzumaki. Nice working with you again. If you ever get tired of blondie here and decide to satisfy your curiosity on how a real woman's like in bed, you know where to find me. Shooting Naruto a sly wink, the purple-haired kunoichi turned and sashayed away towards the interrogation facilities with a disturbing expression and an odd bounce in her step. She's alright once you get to know her. Naruto parroted with raised eyebrows. She's a nutcake. She is not, laughed Ino. She just acts that way cause she likes to see people's reaction. It's all a tactic. Right, said Naruto doubtfully as he rubbed at his chin. I guess this is a case of living a lie for so long it becomes the truth. Ignoring her friend's musing, Ino prodded him with her foot. So where have you been? You've been gone all week. Ah, Ino-chan, did you miss me? Teased the orange-clad male as he wrapped her up in another hug. Yeah, like a yeast infection, shot back Ino while wiggling out of his grip. The loss of warm bodily contact when she finally escaped filled her with a rather surprising amount of regret. Did a snatch and grab of an informant that decided he didn't want to talk anymore out in some new upstart village, grunted Naruto as he leaned up against her desk with his palms resting on the edge of the tabletop. Seems after Sound managed to make it big, everyone and their mother thinks they can set up a hidden village. Hell, I probably could have wiped them off the map by myself. Laughing at the annoyed expression on her classmate's face, Ino poked a finger against his stomach, marveling internally at how hard it was. Someone did their sit-ups. Yeah, well, we don't all have an endless source of chakra stuck in our stomach now, do we? She asked rhetorically. Scoffing, the container for the Kyuubi turned Ino around in her wheelie chair and went right back to work on her shoulders, much to her approval. So Ino, began Naruto with a tentative look on his face. You've given what we talked about more thought. The Yamanaka heir hummed lowly while smirking devilishly at her fellow blonde's apprehension. She really should make him suffer after running off on her after she had finally made up her mind and causing her to wait. But she was a nice person. Plus that massage at the moment made up for everything. Well, she drawled imperiously, I've decided that because I don't have much else going on that I'll give you a chance to blow your money on me. I mean, who in their right mind wouldn't want to? One day you can tell your grandkids you managed to get a date with the Ino Yamanaka once upon a time. Naruto tossed his head back and gave a rich throaty laugh, earning him more than one dreamy looks from the women seated behind Ino. Well, aren't you generous, Ino? How about tonight? You got any plans? Startled slightly at the quick response, Ino grabbed the end of her ponytail and fiddled with the tips of her long hair. The butterflies had returned, turning her stomach into a lottery raffle cage filled with bouncy balls. She hadn't quite expected being asked out so soon, and in front of her coworkers no less. Glancing up, she didn't see a hint of mortification on her fellow blonde's face after having so openly propositioning her in front of an audience. Tonight? Well, yeah, I'm not doing anything else after work, I suppose, she said cautiously. Great. When do you get off? At 6, but I'm not going out dressed like this. Ino protested while gesturing down at the drab gray uniform that had zero appeal. Wouldn't dream of it, though I can't think of anything you wouldn't look good in, Ino-chan. The offhand compliment caused heat to flood her cheeks and the girl silently cursed her body. What the hell was wrong with her? Was she coming down with a fever? If only she could sink into the floor at will. There was probably a jutsu for that. Why don't I come pick you up at 7 o'clock? That should give you some time to freshen up and change. You want to risk running into daddy? Asked Ino with raised eyebrows. Most boys who had asked her out steered as far away from her home as possible, opting to meet her out at an agreed-upon location rather than risk coming within 100 meters of her mind-reading father. Well, there's only one thing I need to hide, chuckled Naruto with a wink. Ino burned crimson at the blatant reminder of what had taken place between them. That was definitely something she didn't want her father to accidentally stumble upon. She wouldn't be surprised if the man decided to do a brief cursory scan of any boy that walked within a meter of her to make sure they had pure intentions, let alone one she brought home. Good thing Daddy doesn't have any heart issues, she thought. She may have been known as the village gossip, but she certainly hadn't learned that habit from her mother, a rather quiet and reserved woman. No, there was no doubt that her father was very much aware of Naruto's recently elevated status from village pariah to low-town bad boy. The question was how close the poor boy could get to the Yamanaka household before killing intent began pouring out of the house. Plus I think it'd be scarier for you guys than me if you decided to go for a stroll in my mind. Naruto jabbed a thumb at his navel and Ino nodded in understanding after a moment. Yeah, anyone who tried to infiltrate Naruto's mind would probably find themselves worrying about something much nastier than having to dig through some buried memories. Some people had natural mental defenses. Naruto had a soul-eating demon guarding his mind. If anyone could survive meeting her overprotective mind-reading father with their sanity intact, it would probably be Naruto. So 7 o'clock? He asked hopefully. Ino bit her lip as she imagined her parents meeting Naruto. Not that he was a bad guy or anything. It was just that she had never brought a boy home before. She had a fair idea on how her father might act. And her mother, the woman would probably be shooting Ino silently insufferable knowing looks for weeks after meeting Naruto. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? Plus it was one date. And it might be fun to watch her father make Naruto squirm a little. That would be her vengeance towards him for deflowering her while she had been hammered. Yeah, sure, that sounds good, she replied with a wicked smirk. What will we be doing? Tutted Naruto, wagging a finger in her face. That would be telling. Oh come on, she whined, how am I supposed to know what to wear? Didn't I tell you? Replied Naruto softly as he took up one of her hands in his. You'd look good in anything. Coloring at his compliment, Ino pouted as he gave her knuckles a brief brush against his rough lips before getting up to leave. Seriously, Naruto, what should I wear? She shouted at his retreating back. Laughing and waving goodbye without turning, he yelled back. Something nice, we should probably look the part where we're going. Watching her fellow blonde vanish around the corner, the Yamanaka folded her arms across her generously developed chest and grumbled about bakas in orange. Something nice, he says. HMMPH, does he even have anything that qualifies? She grumbled uncharitably. Turning back, she noticed several jealous looks she was receiving from the other kunoichi and one of the shinobi seated at their desks. Rolling her eyes, she turned back to the pile of paperwork that seemed to have grown in size while she had been preoccupied with Naruto. Getting back to it, she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Somehow the dreary work suddenly didn't seem so bad now that she had plans for the evening.